Guys, this is Ryan from Bowhill Games. Today I'm going to take you through first in a tutorial series I'm putting up on YouTube, and it's around creating an RPG game in GameSalad. The first segment that we're going to be focusing on is movement. Now typically in an RPG game that I see on GameSalad quite a lot, people are using velocity for movement, which is great, but they're not confining their player to a grid. And I do see a lot of people asking around grid movement in RPGs, and unfortunately there isn't a lot of information out there for these people. Now, when I speak about grid movement, I'm referring to if you've ever played Zelda or Pokemon games on the old Game Boy console. Now, those characters moved on a specific grid. If there was something in the next grid cell along that the player couldn't collide with, then the player would not be able to move in that direction. And that's the sort of movement we're going to be focusing on in this first part of the lesson. So to start with, I've created a new template. I've made mine in iPad landscape. No reason behind that, only that I like to work with quite a big screen so I can publish to multiple templates later on. So I've created a iPad scene and I've got an initial scene. Now I've got an initial character and just some buttons. Now none of these actors have logic. We're going to be going through all the logic together, showing you how to make it from scratch. Okay, now in order to lay out my scene in a grid, I've used a level editor that is available on the forum. I believe a user named Manto created it for the GameSalad community, and I'll include a link to that in the below description. I'll also include the starter template with all the art so you can get ready. So the first thing we're going to look at in terms of our grid movement is the attributes we're going to need. So we're going to create some game level attributes. As you can see, I don't have any new attributes to start with, so we're just going to start creating those together now. So when we're talking about moving a player on a grid, it's important to know the player's position at all times. My grid in this case is a 128 by 128 grid. Grid section is 128 by 128. It's actually the screen size of the iPad, which I think is 1024 by 768. So I'm going to create two attributes, game level attributes, and they're going to be for capturing the player's X and Y coordinates on the screen at all times. So we're going to create some real attributes. And first one we're going to call player X. Okay, and the second one I'm going to call player Y. Okay. So I'm also going to need to know when the player has finished moving in a particular direction. So what's going to happen is our player is going to move to this cell. Logic is going to reset to say it's finished, it's completed, it's in that cell, and it's going to allow it then to move to the next cell. But we're going to check for collision in the forward-facing cells before we allow the player to move. So I'm going to want to create another attribute, and we're going to call this in motion. Now I normally would create this as a boolean, just as a true or false value, but I've read on the forum recently that HTML templates are having some issue with booleans, so we're going to create indexes. But if you're not worried about HTML publishing, boolean will be fine. So I'm going to call this attribute in motion, and we're going to refer to 0 as being false. Okay, the next attribute I'm going to want is my collision attributes. So I need to know if the player is colliding on the right, the left, or up and down. So again, I'm going to create 4 new attributes, and they're all going to be indexed because we're not using booleans in this example. And I'm going to call this player collision left. And I'm going to do that for left, right, up and down. So I'll pause the video while I create these. Okay, so I've created my collision attributes. I'm also going to want to create another attribute for maintaining the player's speed. Again, in games like Pokemon and Zelda, you can usually pick up a speed upgrade. For instance, in the Pokemon games, I believe it's a bike for the character. So I'm going to want a new integer variable, and we're going to call this, let's call this player speed. It allows us to easily increase our players' speed as the game goes on, if you want to add in any upgrades for them. And finally, we're also going to create another attribute called, let's call this one show helpers. In my games, I always allow me to have an option so I can see the different collision objects, so I can see all the different helpers that I use to determine if the game is working correctly. So I'm going to call this one show helpers. Again, if you're not worried about that, you don't need to include this. And finally, we're just going to create some attributes for our up, down, left and right button. I'm going to create this template using touchscreen controls. I'll also add in the keyboard controls as well. So again, I'm going to use indexes for these. Let's call this one up, down, left and right. So those are all the attributes I know I'm going to need. We might have to add some more as we go through the tutorial, but those should be everything that we need to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on physically moving the player in a grid. So we're going to focus on that behavior first, and then we're going to add in the collision afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the Actors tab and open up my player actor. So as I mentioned at the start, we're going to need to know the player's X and Y coordinates at all times, so we know if they can transition to the next part of the grid or if they're still in motion. So it's important that we're going to constrain our game attributes to our player's X and Y position. Now I like to group all of my actors together, so I'm going to call this one setting players X and Y. Just so I can refer to them. Obviously GameSalad does have the note options, so you can add in comments if you like. I just like to name my the groups in certain ways. So I'm going to want the constrain attribute behavior. There it is. So what constrain does is it checks every frame and updates the game attribute to the player's position, so it will never be out of sync. So I'm going to constrain game level attribute, and it's going to be our player X attribute, to actor, so in this case it's player position X. And we're going to do that again for the Y position as well, so we can paste that in. So I've just used copy and paste there, and I'm going to change my attribute to player Y, and I'm going to change that to self, which is player position Y. Okay, so now our game knows our players X position and Y position at all times. So now we're going to focus on the physical movement of our player around the screen. Before we do that, we're going to look at remember when I said we want to know if the player is in motion at all times. So we're going to create a new group, we're going to call this movement, and this is where all of our movement controls are going to get kept. And we're going to want to create a new rule, and just move that into the movement group for us. And our rule is going to be looking at the character, the player's actor, and it's going to be looking at its linear motion. So we're going to go down to player, motion. So we're going to look at linear velocity, and we're going to take the X and Y linear velocities. Okay. So if the player's velocity X and velocity Y are 0, so the player has stopped, we're going to change attribute, and it's our game attribute in motion to 0, which we're going to be calling false, else the motion is true. Now this is a really important rule. This defines if the player can continue, if the player can move to a cell or not. So this is essentially what keeps our player on the grid. Now a bit further down, when we start moving up 128 or left 128, our motion is going to be set to true. So it'll always finish the motion before you're allowed to move again. Okay, so we're going to call this one reset in motion. Okay, so we're always going to have this one first. So our next rule is going to be, our next two rules actually are going to be around resetting our up, down, left and right buttons based on the velocity of the player actor. So our first rule is going to be, let's do the up and down ones first. So we're going to do attribute, player, and again it's motion, linear velocity, y is 0. Then we're going to want to change our attribute, game, up, and we'll be using an index of 0 is false, and change attribute, game, down, to 0 as well. So we're going to call this one resetting and that's fine, we'll leave it like that. So we'll copy this one and paste this rule again, because we're going to do the same now for left and right. A lot of copy and paste is going to be done in this, so there isn't actually a lot of work to do. So again, it's game, left, game, right. So we're resetting those, but this time it's based on player, motion, linear velocity, and x, because it's left and right. Okay, and we'll move that up into the group as well. So, there you go. Okay, so those are the rules you should have at the moment. So now we can focus on actually moving up, down, left and right, because we have all of our reset rules in place now. So we're going to go over and create a new rule. And this time it's going to be our up rule. So we're going to be looking at when attribute game up equals 1, because we're using an index, so we're going to now move our player. But in Pokemon and Zelda games, even if you couldn't move up, touching the button still change the player's direction, if I remember rightly. We're going to add that functionality because I just think it looks better. So we're going to want to change the player's image to, in my images here, you can see I have some back images. So moving up is going to be the back image 1. So we're going to change our player's image. And in our behaviors, we have a change image behavior. And back 1. You can use any of the back images, I'm just using that one. So even if our player can't move in that direction, he's still going to face that direction. And I think that's quite important for a game to look good. So once we've done that rule, we're going to focus on, can our player move in a particular direction? But you may have noticed, actually when I went to my images, I only have images for the right facing character. I don't have images for the left. I never made any. So in order to do my left and right animation, I'm going to have to flip my actors to the left and right, which means for all the other directions, up and down, I'm going to up, down and right, I'm going to want to unset the flip. So if I create a change attribute, and I'll show you what that means in a little while once we start moving. Change attribute player, and go down to graphics, and you got flip horizontal. There it is. And we're just going to do this as false. Because it's only for if a player is facing left that we're going to want to flip the image. So now we're ready to start our collision rules. So can the player physically move? We've done the can it face a direction, but can it actually move? So again, create another rule. And this time it's if attribute game, and it's one of the collision attributes we made earlier. So we're moving up, so if player collision up is false, then we're okay to move our player. First, we're going to want to make sure that our player isn't moving horizontally, so it isn't moving on the x-axis. So we're going to change player's motion, and if I move that up so everyone can see, linear velocity x to 0. So we're stopping our player from moving horizontally. I'm just going to move that into our rule for moving up. And then we're going to want to animate our player, because we don't want to move our player if he's not animated. So on the behaviors tab we have an animate behavior. If I drag that over to our screen and scroll up so you can see. And I have some images for animations. I'm going to drag those over. And it is a sequence. And that's a bit fast, so if I move down to 6 frames a second, it will go through those. Now, I don't want it to restore this image. I don't want it to restore the actor image when I'm done. Otherwise the animation will flip back to him facing forward. So I'm going to untick that, and I want the animation to loop. So we have our rule that says if the player isn't colliding with anything on above him, then he is able to move in that direction. So we have our animation. Now we need to actually add the move behavior. And if you scroll down on our behaviors tree, there is a move to option. And if we drag that down to our behaviors, and now we can actually move to. So we're going to say move to on the y-axis 1 to 8, because that is the size of the cell. Because on my cell I'm doing a 1 to 8 by 1 to 8 grid. You would change this to your grid size. And remember, we managed our speed based on a game attribute, so I'm going to change the speed to player speed. And I'm going to want to change relative to our actor, because that's my actor's position. I want to change to 128 up. So wherever my actor is 128 up from where he was. And I'm going to check run to completion. So this is our first move. I'm going to rename our rule to move up. And after that we can go and set up our up button so you can see this working now. This video is running a little longer than I would have hoped. I'm trying to go through it in a as slowest manner as possible for anyone who's new to GameSalad to follow along. So if you have any questions, put those down in the comment. I'm going to end the video here, and I'll upload all the videos at the same time so you don't miss out on any. Okay guys, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and any suggestions in what I can do to make it a better learning experience for you, again, please comment below. Thanks guys.